Hello, Principal Matters podcast listeners. We're so excited to be back today. We have an incredible episode for you today with my co host, William D. Parker and Wes Cottongim. You'll love it, but we're not going to let you listen yet. We want to do one of our favorite parts, which is a Q&A using a listener question, 5 minutes. Will and I will break apart this question, and this one is a tricky one. I feel like we say that every week, but it really is tricky. This is the question, Will. Are you ready?
Hmm.
Okay. What are some best practices that other buildings use to, air quote, flatten the walls of the school, air quote? Where did you start on this journey and process?
And
So,
Jen,
Will,
I literally had to stop and go, That's not a term I use. So
right.
I did a little bit of research. Flattening the walls means that everyone, all your stakeholders feel comfortable in sharing their ideas, feeling valued. It's a place where people can be open. So best practices that other buildings use to flatten the walls of their school. That is such an interesting question. What are you
And
thinking?
well, I started this episode, so I'm not going to talk first. Will, you are. I am going to take this ball and pass it back to you. Where did you start on this journey and process?
Well, when I think about especially helping your stakeholders feel comfortable in sharing their ideas and feeling valued. Um, I can't remember who said this the other day, but I was listening to a podcast. It may have been actually you were talking to Elena Aguilar. This was you guys. I was
Oh,
listening to the interview
yeah.
you did with Elena, and she said to you in that conversation, you can tell in the tone of someone's voice a lot about what they're thinking and feeling.
Mhm.
You can just tell. And so I would just say, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later when you and I are doing a future episode on your article on principal mentoring and coaching. I would say the heart is as important as the head when it
Mhm.
comes to how do you create the kind of environment where people feel comfortable sharing their values. And so, one of the tricks that I like to use, and this may sound weird, but I think it's a point of clarity, um, is I just like to be clear that I would like to invite you into a conversation, whether I'm setting a small group, a big group, a parent group, a group of leaders, a group of students. I try to set some norms at the beginning of how would you like this conversation to go? What's the best outcome you can imagine? And that usually lends an opportunity to set some parameters around can we make this a conversation where there's no judgment? Can we make this a conversation where we assume the best intentions about each other? Can we make this a conversation where we're trying to share within a safe space where we can be real, but we're all pushing toward the same direction? And even if that's not always possible, just saying those things can sometimes create the tone where man, people get a whole lot more open than they would if you didn't have that kind of clarity. So that's one place I would start, Jen.
Right, right. I also think there's a component here we don't talk enough about with leadership, and that's your own confidence that you can handle these tricky conversations and you
Mm-hmm.
can help find a place for all the emotions and all of the expertise and, let's just say it, anger, resentment,
Mm-hmm.
joy, celebrate all of the stuff. Um, the other day, I led a pretty tricky meeting, and there were probably 20 people that came in, and I knew there was one of the attendees, is a big thinker, really, really smart, and, a big feeler as well. And I knew she had something. I knew it. And so I opened the meeting, "Welcome, how's everybody?" And then I looked at her dead in the eye in front of everyone else, and I said, "Okay, I'm sensing an aura here. Tell me how you're feeling." And she
Mm-hmm.
burst into laughter, and she said, "Oh, you're right. I have a lot of big questions, and I'm feeling frustrated, and this is the kind of day I had." So I think sometimes it helps to identify, not even in just one person, but even with a group. You can say, "Listen, we have some really heavy work to do today. I want to make sure that you're all heard and that you don't feel silenced in this meeting." So this kind of echoes what you just said, to
Yeah.
articulate your intentions and to make sure that wherever the big, the elephant in the room is, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
that you go right at it and say, "Hey, we're gonna acknowledge this and tell me about that so that I, as the facilitator or the mediator or the intermediate, whatever role you are in, so that you can do a good job with that intention to flatten the walls of the school."
Well, and the cool part is, Jen, that this what you and I are explaining right now is actually something that I read recently that's confirmed by evidence in science. There will be a future episode coming out in a few weeks where I interviewed David Yeager, who wrote a book called 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. It's a mentor mindset book, and it's endorsed by Carol Dweck, and it's becoming one of my favorite go-tos because he does not just does he talk about the values that you and I are talking about, but he's actually a researcher at the University of Texas in Austin who's tried to quantify what happens when you're clear. And he actually, in the book, uses examples of the difference between teachers and principals. Even he pulls out both of those examples and business managers. The difference between when you just show up, observe someone's behavior, sit in a meeting, versus when you show up and you explain why I'm here.
Mhm.
And when you explain why, that something happens in the mind and emotions of the other person because their assumptions of why you're there, sometimes they get defensive or they put up barriers. But when you just explain the why you're there, suddenly it lifts a lot of those assumptions and barriers and gives you a chance to begin to collaborate and work together. And so it was really cool for me to read someone um, who's actually done some control groups and who's done the research to show the difference with when you communicate clarity and when you don't.
Well, and let's add this. If you can't answer that question, you probably shouldn't have the meeting
Yeah.
then, right? Right? You know that's true. Like, if you don't know why you're there, put a little pause on that. Come back to it when you are sure.
Oh, I love that. All right, Jen. Oh man, this is
Thanks.
so fun. Thank you for the opportunity to do these Q&As together. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for listening. And I know you're going to love this week's conversation. Thank you for doing what matters. You can always find resources from this podcast and the other work that I do at williamdpark.com. And Jen, how can they find your resources?
They can find me anytime at jenschwanke.com.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 418. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're going to be talking about maintaining your passion with my special guest, Dr. Wes Cottongim. Dr. Wes Cottongim currently serves as an assistant professor of education administration at Western Kentucky University. Prior to arriving at WKU, Dr. Cottongim spent 20 years serving as a K-12 public school educator. Approximately 12 of those years were spent in administrative roles, either as an assistant principal or principal. Since arriving at WKU, Dr. Cottongim has taught courses for both aspiring and current school administrators. He has focused his research on burnout and self-efficacy of teachers and school administrators, and he's developed a passion for guiding current leaders through the highs and lows and sustainability of the profession. Dr. Wes Cottongim, which I know your students call you Dr. C, or your former students did. Welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Will. I appreciate the opportunity to join you. I have been a longtime listener myself. You've gotten me through a lot of different workouts and a lot of different time around the fire pit. Yeah, I've really enjoyed your show for a long time. Glad we had the opportunity to meet, to make the connection that we have. Yeah, so you hit most of it. A little personal background, like you said, been in education for over 20 years now. Now I'm at the university level, but prior to that, I was a classroom teacher, specifically sixth grade. That was always my niche. I'm an elementary guy. I tell my students that a lot. I say, forgive me, but I'm going to talk in the elementary lingo right now. Yes, I'm an elementary guy, elementary teacher. Served as an elementary assistant principal in 2 different schools, and then had an opportunity to lead as principal of a wonderful, wonderful elementary school here in my town of Bowling Green, Kentucky. And really, really enjoyed that experience. My kiddos still go there. And actually, after this recording, after our podcast today, I have been invited back to referee a basketball game between teachers and students, which I'm thankful that I still get invited back to take part, because when you take new opportunities away from an actual school building, what you miss most is it's the kids. So
Oh, I love that visual. I'm already imagining you right now out there blowing the whistle
yes,
and making sure that those students and teachers have a competitive show. And I don't know if you're going to play favorites, Dr.
Well,
Cottongim.
I've already gotten a few texts telling me that the staff better win. I've already been practicing my, I'm gonna tee people up left and right. I don't know. I might have to kick a few out.
Oh, this is going to be so much fun. I want to talk before we jump into today's conversation. I want to set the stage. So, several months back, I aired an episode with a friend of mine, Dan Kelly, who was a principal for many, many years in Rhode Island and now is serving at the university level. You two connected after that show. And Dan and you also circled me into that conversation. You and I jumped on and got to know each other through Zoom. And in that conversation, I was like, Wes, I want you to tell your story to Principal Matters listeners, and especially the stories that you've been able to share as a professor's now training leaders. Before we do that, though, talk a little bit about your current work and what are some of the things you're most excited about happening there at Western Kentucky University?
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for that question. I treasured my time in K through 12. Um, and I've mentioned the different roles that I had, but honestly, probably I loved being a principal. I don't know if I had a favorite position because I really loved being an assistant principal because of all the managerial tasks that I was responsible for. I love that role. There's an advantage of being an assistant principal. You get to pass the buck. When those tough questions come in, you say, I don't know, that's a great question. We should ask Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so. I loved being a principal. Making the switch to my current role was honestly one of the hardest decisions that I've ever had to make. And it got to a point that I stopped returning phone calls from the university because I was just torn. I knew in my heart, what I felt was the right decision, which was to take this position. But you get into it for the kids and you don't want to leave the kids. But yeah, so some of the work that I'm doing now, it's multifaceted. I have the opportunity, and I'm very intentional about this. I try to get into the schools as much as I can. We are blessed with some wonderful schools here in our area. I do some recruiting for our education administration program. Gosh, we've got a lot of neat things coming up on the horizon. We were just approved for a principal apprenticeship. Of course, we have your typical routes of like a master's progression. In Kentucky, we have what's called a rank 1. And that's so many hours past your master's degree. So we have those programs. Gosh, we have director of special ed. We have DPP. We have superintendency. We have a doc program. So lots of fun things going on. But my favorite part, no doubt, is working with the folks that want to become principals because, I think back to my journey, and I come from a family of educators, and I never, ever, ever thought that I would be an educator. But, God had different plans for me, and I found my niche, and I'm thankful that I did. But, in our courses, I talk a lot about, what the research says and what best practices say. And I even tell some war stories. I try to keep those to a minimum, but this worked really well for me. Or, hey, I did this and it was an epic fail, and I would suggest you not do that. So I try to give them, although yes, at the university level, it needs to have a certain rigor, but at the same time, I try to keep it real. And I try to keep, hey guys, on the first day of school, there's going to be something that could happen when you get that first principal gig, you get in that position and something happens, and guess what? We didn't cover it because you can't cover everything because that job is so unpredictable. But I try to be real, and I think more than anything, that's what people need. I think that's what teachers need. We're going to focus probably more on administration during our talk, but people need to know that someone is looking out for them that gets it, that has been there, that has been through what you've been through, whether it's good or bad, and has advice for you. So I try to keep it real, Will.
Yeah. Well, when I was working through my bachelor's and master's in education, and you know this too, Wes. I mean, most of the people listening to the show have sat in those seats, and there's something so incredibly encouraging when the person on the other side of you is been that practitioner, that they've done that work. And that's not to say that people who've are just rich in research and practice aren't also integral to the important things that happen in education development. But when you're on the other side of someone who's like you and I would both say been in the war and been through the thick of it, that makes a big difference when you're listening to the advice that they're giving you and the feedback that they're giving you too. I want to set the stage for today's conversation because one of the reasons we decided to circle back and record this conversation was we talked a lot together about the vulnerability involved in this work. And part of the journey that you went through as a school leader, experiencing both successes and challenges, but also eventually stepping into a moment where you began to experience some burnout. And so before we get to that part of the story, I want to back up and just ask you first, talk about your story in school leadership and what were some of the things that you as a school leader found to be fulfilling, but what were also some of those areas that were the most challenging that you share with your students?
Yeah, so the first most fulfilling thing in any of those roles, in my opinion, are the students. Um, that's obviously why you get into it to begin with, but the students on a good day, if you're a school leader, you need to get out and get with this and be with those students. On those hard days, that's all the more reason to get out and be with those students. I was fortunate enough, and I would use the word blessed to have. We had two what we call MSD classrooms in my school, and those kiddos, they have significant challenges, whether it's physical or cognitive, whatever the case may be. But I tell you what, those kids love you more than any kids, and that was reciprocal. If I was having a hard day, I would just disappear. I didn't like being in my office anyway. I tried to get out of my office as much as I could. Um, but I would go and I would just go visit that classroom. And that might mean I take my laptop and I go sit and we might just hang out and we might play a game or I might help them with the lesson. But being with those kids, that's where my heart always was.
What I love about that, Wes, is that and I was thinking about that in the context of some of the other conversations I've been having about, priorities and time management. And it doesn't seem to matter um how well you've tried to create systems to get your work done. There are some of those days where you just are like, I'm forgetting my why. And so where am I going to go back and rediscover it? So stepping into those classrooms with those kids that you love and are going to love you back, it just refills your tank. And I also know that leadership comes with its challenges. So I'm sure with your students that you're preparing for the work to become administrators, you share some of those stories too. So what are some of the things you try to prepare them for when it comes to the challenges of school leadership?
I think you try to prepare them for the unpredictable. Leadership can be it's a lonely position. It's certainly a lonely position, but you're in that role for a reason. I had a class just a few nights ago, and we were talking about something similar, and there was a few that mentioned, I don't consider myself really a leader, and I said, stop, you are a leader. What is your current role? And they told me, I said, you absolutely are a leader. One was just a classroom teacher. One was had another service type role. And I said, you are totally a leader. And I went through and I talked about how I would share with, my custodians. I said, you are a lead. This cafeteria during lunchtime, this is your classroom. This is absolutely, you are the leader in here. What do you need me to do? Because again, I tried to get out of my office and I wanted to go in there and be with the kids. So, but I was there to serve. But Will, if it's okay, I want to talk just a little bit about that journey of getting into administration. When I first made the decision back in my undergraduate days to switch from business management and finance major to an education major, specifically elementary education, I knew at that point early on in my coursework, I said, yes, I want to teach. I can do this. And this is where I feel like I need to be. But with that being said, I want to lead at some point. Now, this was far before I realized what all that entailed, but I knew that that was the direction I wanted to go eventually. And and like we've mentioned, I had that opportunity, but I was blessed to get that position as principal at an incredible school. But I think probably the biggest reason I wanted to talk to you today, or have to share this opportunity, to share a little bit about my story, because as fun as it was, as fulfilling as it was, as much as I miss it at times, as much as I still try to be involved. I still teach junior achievement classes. I go and referee basketball games, or whatever the case may be. I still try to be involved, but the position can be heavy at times. It's it can be a thankless job, but at the same time, there's nothing better than running into a former student. Coincidentally, this happened to me a few weeks ago at a basketball game, and I ran into a kiddo he's older now, but when I had him, he was going through a lot of things, and I knew that. It wasn't something that I shared with everybody, but it was something that I knew that he was going through, and he reminded me of some of the things that I did, and that makes me feel better. That gives you fulfillment, really lets you know that what you do matters. But there was a summer that was leading into my final year as the lead principal. And in hindsight, it wasn't any busier of a summer than any other summer. You're scrambling, trying to get people hired, take care of enrollment, all of your typical personnel and managerial tasks that you have to do. But there was something about that summer. I would be remiss if I didn't say we were also building a new school during that summer. So we were transitioning from an old building to a new building. Beautiful school, $20 million. I mean, it was just, it was something that we were very, very proud of. But I got between the building process, the leading process, all of the tasks that a principal is required to do, I got to a point that I just had, I call it decision fatigue. I literally would go, I remember a specific instance that we were standing in the new hallway of the new school, and one of the painters they were asking me about what do I want here, what do I want in this hallway, and as simple of a question as that was, I just froze, and I stood there, and I just remember saying, I don't know, and the anxiety that came over me, that's the oldest memory that I have of this journey that I'm kind of leading into. But that summer, the weight of the job got heavier and heavier on me.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but how do you actually get the right insights and know the best next steps? The secret is IXL. IXL helps you easily assess performance and determines the best path forward for each student. Whether you need data for benchmarking or intervention planning, IXL can do it all. And IXL doesn't stop at assessments. It also provides you with everything else your school needs, from a standards-aligned K-12 curriculum to actionable analytics. IXL's online learning and teaching platform is research proven to improve student outcomes and is used by 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. If you also want to start driving real progress, get started today at IXL.com/PM. Support for Principal Matters comes from EduSkills. Let's face it, many schools are trying to support their Title III and multilingual programs on their own. And if that's you, it's time to take your support to the next level with EduSkills. EduSkills is designed by former educators as a go-to platform for support for K-12 multilingual programs. They understand the value of multilingual students, and they give educators the tools that they need to help all students succeed. From improving language acquisition to boosting family engagement, EduSkills offers cutting-edge tech and services for districts of all sizes. With easy setup and ongoing support, they'll make sure your transition is smooth and effective and that more students are receiving better services. Ready to get started? Visit eduskillsllc.com or call 405-879-9898 to schedule a demo. EduSkills, breaking barriers and building bridges for multilingual education. You're reminding me of a conversation that Jen Schwanke has with one of our other guests just a few weeks ago, and where they talked about the very the thing that you're talking about right now, Wes, is something that a lot of leaders aren't willing to talk about, which is what happens when you hit that wall.
Yeah.
Because no matter how long you've done this work, some people hit that wall early, some people hit it later. Sometimes it hits unexpectedly. But you hit a wall in your leadership where even something as simple as give me an opinion on the paint seems like it's overwhelming. I've had leaders tell me, like, at the end of the day, please don't ask me what's for supper. I can't make another decision.
Yes.
Yeah. And so talk about, how did you respond to that? Because I know where you are now in your journey and the success that you've had in the work that you've done as a professor, but that you've walked through several responses to hitting that wall that I think could help other leaders.
Right. Will, I hit that wall, and the paint example was just that. It was just an example. But there was a point in that small little time frame that everything was big. And what I mean by that is making a decision about what color to paint a wall, that was big. And I would have to mull it over, and I would have to really process that. Making a decision on on hiring, that was something that I prided. I felt like I was very gifted in picking quality folks for my building. And honestly, most of them are still there today. But every single decision, whether it was actually big or not, in my mind, was big. So that anxiousness just became overwhelming. I didn't know what to do. I'd never experienced that before. As a teacher, as an assistant principal, I had never experienced that. To be honest with you, my personality is very laid back. And I think my wife would probably tell you to a fault because you get fussed at, how that is. You get fussed at every once in a while. When are you going to do this? But I'm very laid back, but I didn't know what to do. I'd never been there before. The long hours that, come with the position became longer. And it was almost I felt like I had to be there. Yes, there was always something to do, and I was always checking things off the list, but I felt like I had to be there. To say that I was on 24/7, a lot of leaders will talk about that, especially school leaders, and you are, and again, you sign up for that. But if you can't find that shut-off switch, it can really, really have a detriment, and that's exactly what it would do to me. I would wake up in the middle of the night because I'm thirsty or whatever the case may be, and before I ever got my drink, I find myself in almost a panic attack of I need to do this. I need to do this. This is due 2 weeks from now. Did I have time to do it? Absolutely, I had time to do it. But the effect that it had on me, I had a hard time, pushing those as those things were coming at me. I had a hard time pushing them away, and doing them with I don't know, a balanced approach.
Yeah.
And I say that, so that's how it all started for me. And it got harder and it got harder. And honestly, that anxiousness was really not my biggest issue. That led to a time, a kind of a dark time for me. And I told you before we started, I said, I'm nervous because I feel vulnerable even sharing this, but I've also always felt like my journey is something that I hope and I pray can help someone else, because I know that someone that's going to listen to this might not experience every one of the things that I've explained, but they're experiencing some of the same issues that I went through.
Yeah. So long hours become longer, feeling like I have to be there, the inability to shut it off, the entrance into what you call dark times. You can look back at that now and recognize what was happening, Wes, but at the time, at the time, what was going through your mind isn't what's going through your mind right now. So I'm really curious for listeners, and there may be somebody listening to this, or and you're like, wait a second, you're describing exactly my condition, and that's one of the reasons why Wes was courageous enough to say, let's have this conversation, Will, with your listeners, because Wes, what were some of the unhelpful things that you did when that began to happen? But then also, what were some of the helpful things that you did to help you out of that journey?
Right. And to answer that question, I mean, that dark time was depression. That's what it was for me. And um, and it wasn't something. I am very, very private person, just naturally. Uh, I don't like to share what's happening in my life. And again, that's just my nature. Um, and especially when you're leading a school, the last thing you want, I didn't want my just an analogy. I didn't want my cough to give the whole school a cold. I didn't want my struggle to rub off on the culture within our building, because we had a strong culture, and it was something that I tried to build up. Um, yeah, so that journey with depression, it got dark. It really did. It got dark, and my faith, and I'll just jump to some of the things that worked the best for me. My faith, family, especially my wife. She was very supportive. She could see, and it wasn't just her, but she could see. When your kiddos have done something and you look at them and say, what have you done? You just have that guilty look. What have you done? Well, I had not a guilty look, but I just had a look. Uh, and she saw that. And some of my teachers saw it, and they would come up to me and they'd say, "Are you okay?" And of course, my answer was always, "Yes, I'm great. Hey, you did a great job on that lesson that I saw today." But inside, I was hurting. I was really, really hurting. Um, I would take there would be afternoons, and this only happened a few times, but some of my real, real hard afternoons, I'd call my wife and I'd say, "Hey, I'm going to the track." There was a track behind our school. I said, "I just need you. I don't know what I need you to do. I just need you to be there." And we would just walk lap after lap after lap. And eventually I was able to kind of come out of that dark spot at the time, uh, and just talk to her. And that led to me, getting help. And I want to specifically talk about that because when I first sought someone to talk to, and that was, for my wife and my personal family, uh, that is not something I wanted to do. Again, because of my private nature, but number two, I thought that was just for the weak. I said, I'm not talking to anybody. I'm not going to talk about my feelings. I'm not going to talk about how work is hard. Work is hard for everybody. Everybody has tough days. I'm not doing that. That's a waste of time. But let me say this. Let me follow up with those things that saved me. Um, it saved me professionally. Um, I was able to eventually come out of that point. It saved me personally. I was able to get the help that I needed. And it's something when you face that, folks, and I say all this, obviously, this was all exacerbated by some of the duties of the position. Um, but it's if you're not careful, it can have a really incredible impact on your personal life too. So it's something that I still have to face every day. I'm doing great now. I'm at a totally different place, but it is a hurdle that's in my way every single day. I can go in that direction, or I can walk around that obstacle and keep going down the path of the new path that I found. But the folks that are listening to this, or the folks in my classes that are in my aspiring administrators, yes, that was part of my story. That was a journey that I had. A lot of folks encountered this. I went to, well, before I get off track, a lot of folks encountered that. The principalship is one of the most fulfilling positions. I would say probably it was the most fulfilling position that I ever had. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. But I didn't have the right coping mechanisms in place to be able to avoid some of the things that you're going to face. Kudos to the folks that can be a principal and, in these days for 20 plus years. I admire you. I sincerely do. That was not in God's plan for me. But my journey is something I share. I don't go into incredible detail, but I try to share with people. If you're facing things, you need to talk to folks. Don't hold that in. I had an incredibly professionally. Probably only opened up to 2 folks. That was my assistant principal, because I felt like she needed to know in case I wasn't able to get there that day. My superintendent was incredibly supportive, and I'm thankful for that. But if I had any advice for folks, your work, if you're a leader, if you're a school leader, your work matters every single day. There's no job that has any greater impact. But if you're struggling, you're not alone. Just know that you are absolutely not alone. You would be amazed what little I have shared since I've been on this journey. You would be amazed at how many people have reached out to me and just said, "Hey, I thought I was the only one," and you're not. You're not the only one. So there's different folks out there. So whatever your most important things are in your life, whether it's faith, whether it's family, it's easy to say you need to find balance. Well, I kind of laugh at that now, because at the time, if someone said that to me, I just want to strangle them, because it's like, you don't understand. But now that I've been able to do that and actually put those things into practice, exercising, playing golf. I love to play golf. I found things that I have to prioritize time to do that, so that I'm more well balanced and so I have a greater impact. And I know we only have so much time. I can go on and on and on about this, and that is a snippet of my journey. But if you're in that position, just know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You're not alone, and your work matters.
This is why I love to do this show, Wes, because I'm just so inspired by your story. And I know that there's leaders out there that are inspired by this story too. And I have so many thoughts. I want to share a couple of them. One is, I've referenced this before, and I think you and I may have talked about this offline too, but a good friend of mine, Dr. Burke Tuttle, who works at Oklahoma State University, has done a lot of work in trauma research, and she worked on a research project around moral injury. The concept that a lot of people in service, law enforcement, military officers will engage in work that sometimes is so hard or so traumatic that they'll suffer themselves, even though they weren't on the other side of something that they saw traumatically happening. And I think I still have not, and maybe you're at the university level, so this might be a research project assigned to you and your students, but I would love to see someone do research around that as it relates to school leadership, because I've talked to so many school leaders who can't quite put their fingers on what is this emotion that I'm dealing with that has got me so wrapped up that I can't put my finger on it, or that I have the same symptoms of somebody with PTSD. And so I think that's I think it's just important for leaders to recognize that and I'm glad you said it this way, as balanced, prioritized, systematic as we can become. Sometimes we hit a wall that we can't quite define what that is. And it may be something that's going on within you that's going to take someone else to help you discover what that is. I know you have a follow-up to that.
No, you said something there that really resonated with me. My work now, part of my requirements are I have to research, I have to do publications and things like that. And this journey of mine has provided some of my motivation. I'm looking at a proposal that I have submitted right now that was actually recently picked up. I'm going to present this summer at SREB at their national conference in Nashville. But the title of it is, "What About Me? The Growing Need of Social Emotional Interventions for School Leaders." And, now I have a passion to help folks that are in a similar situation. What is it that in the prep programs, what is it that we're not providing that folks need? The attrition rates, gosh, whether it's teachers, I'll just say in the field of education, are really high. I think most recently, I had heard the average principal tenure these days is 3 years. And that's down from 5 years just a few years before that. So my research and my passion now is finding out the why. Why is that? Is it, we can have a whole podcast on that topic. But what are those reasons? Is it related to some of the things that I've shared? Is it more legislative, related? But yeah, those topics, culture. I'm really focused on culture in my work. I have something out there right now about what are the catalysts of culture in your building. So these are all things that have become my passion based on my journey. And as hard as that time was, now I'm thankful for it because it made me stronger, made me a stronger leader, made me a stronger husband, stronger dad. But if I could help one, then it's worth me spending some time with you.
Well, Wes, I want to first of all say thank you for the enormous amount of courage that it takes to tell that story, because when you and I talked offline and you were talking about how much work you do now in prep with leaders and in support with leaders and in coaching with leaders based on those lessons that you learned from hitting that wall, from relying on your faith and your family and your wife and asking for help to get you through that dark place to where you are now in the work that you're doing, supporting and developing other leaders toward that work. Thank you for being willing to share so transparently. As we wrap up, I want leaders to know how they can connect with you, because there may be somebody listening to this right now that's like, there's probably somebody listening to this right now that is going to want to reach out to you and have the same conversation with you. So how can people stay connected with you? And then what are any other parting words that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, so I'd love to connect with someone. And if that is something that you'd like to do, email is obviously the best for me. My email is Wes, WES dot Cottongim, COTTONGIM at WKU.edu. I'm very active on Twitter/X. My handle is at DRC _WKU, and that's Dr. C _WKU. So yeah, I'd love to connect with you if I could help in any sort of way. I do different consulting too, whether it's with different groups like Cognia or whether it's I'm very focused on school safety as well. So I get to work with the Kentucky Center for School Safety. So if we can help in any sort of way, I'd be happy to. But parting words, and I'll just reiterate what I said earlier. Your work matters. You're noticed. And if you're struggling, you're not the only one. And I would absolutely encourage you to, whether it's me, whether it's Will, whether it's, your superintendent or your assistant principal or your wife, reach out because your work matters and someone needs you.
I've had at least a couple of different listeners who have emailed me after shows, Wes, to tell me that sometimes it's when I say at the very end, what you do matters, makes them emotional. And I have to pause and ask myself, why is that the case? And I think it's the case because you touched on this earlier, but leadership is a lonely role. And sometimes there's no one else telling you or reflecting with you anything because you spend your whole day reflecting with others. And so I just want to tell you listeners right now that whatever place that you're in your leadership, whether you're in an optimistic place or whether you're in a really challenging place, all of us experience waves. You may be on a high one day and the next day you hit something that you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought I would face this in my life. And those moments sometimes feel really lonely. You're not alone, which is one of the reasons I do the show, because it's just a way for me to continue to connect and collaborate with leaders across the U.S. and the world to remind ourselves that we can always do better together. So Wes Cottongim, thank you so much for your leadership. Principal Matters listeners, thank you for the leadership that you provide, because what you do matters. We'll talk to you again soon. You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.